music is bound by the medium in which it exists. Let's talk about it. There was a time when the only way you could listen to music was if you had an instrument, you knew someone with an instrument, or you knew a bunch of people with instruments, and you could go there and they could play it, or you could play it, and it was live. Music in that time was defined by the instruments you had access to, the instruments that existed. At some point, someone had to invent the saxophone. We don't have to talk about him. Before there was any kind of recorded music, people bought and sold sheet music the way that now we buy and sell CDs, I guess. The real instruments that exist in the world are only so large. The largest instrument is an organ, because it's the whole church that becomes an instrument. And so the lowest note that can be played at the time is a note that can be played by an organ. However, once we get around to recording, first we had wax cylinders. They sounded awful. The microphones were terrible and the wax cylinders were awful. But at a certain point, we had vinyl records. And there was a period before they were hi-fi, and they were still low-quality recordings. They were very mid-rangey. You couldn't get a lot of low-end, and you couldn't get a lot of high-end. The low-end would spit the needle out of the record, and the high-end was too detailed to engrave. So you get these mid-rangey sounds. Then we invent hi-fi records. You can get a lot of high frequencies. You can get a little more low frequency, but you still can't, well, you don't need any frequencies lower. If you listen to any of like the Beatles records, all of these pieces of music from back then are mixed expecting there to be no such thing as a subwoofer. While the music for vinyl was always recorded to tape, it takes a while before cassette tapes are sold. And once you're moving away from vinyl and onto cassette tapes, it has its own set of problems, including limited quality and the small size for carrying it around. But you don't have a needle at that point, so your ability to use high and low frequencies is now defined by the tape itself and the tape machines. Speakers are constantly getting better throughout all of this. The original thing that Dolby invented was an EQ curve for tape machines so that you could get less noise and more signal if you EQ'd it one way when you recorded it, and then you un-EQ'd it the other way when you played it back. And ever since, they've been trying to figure out something else to sell us. At a certain point, CDs exist. Digital music is possible. And once digital music is possible, the floodgates kind of open. If you can encode it digitally, it is up to, the person playing back to make sure that it doesn't destroy their speakers, because a computer can write anything down that it wants. And so at that point, we have full access to frequencies beyond the hearing spectrum. We have full access to frequencies down to 0 hertz, and the music starts to get bassier. And we live in a world where the bass really starts to bump in a way that we have never been able to do before. Then the digital tools start to come, and the digital tools mean that we can make the music as loud as it can possibly get. The loudness wars were really peak in the early 2000s, but I would argue with hyperpop that today we are still wrestling with it. In today's world, most people are listening off of low quality streaming, and they're listening on Bluetooth headphones, and that means you're missing a lot of extra detail for convenience. I would argue that genres like hyperpop, where you are really pushing the high end and you are really pushing the loudness, come from a world where you're not always getting that high end, and if you're listening out of a phone speaker, louder is always better. And so you're really pushing it and you're cranking that digital sound as loud as you can go. That's kind of where we are today. We have the big bassy music. We've kind of gotten over that, but we haven't really gotten over the loudness. What do you think is next in listening to music, and how do you think that will change the way people make and release music?